Hello everyone, and welcome to the September Southern Fried DNN user group meeting. We are meeting here on the third Thursday of the month to dive into everything that's going on within the DNN community that we are excited about, that we found interesting over the past month, and we have some fantastic information to go through and unpack today. We have a guest from 51 Degrees. James Rosewell is here to talk with us about web analytics and the changes that are coming up that I'll describe that I did not see on the radar or know was coming up. So this is going to be an exciting bit of information for us to all go through, and more importantly, spend several minutes after the introduction debating and talking about an open conversation. So as we get into the topic, think of your questions, jot them down, certainly interrupt, but know that we're definitely going to have a roundtable discussion about it as we go through. So as we begin every Southern Fried DNN user group meeting, we're going to talk a little bit about community events and things that have been going on. I don't know if you can see, but I tried to make a drawing over here in the corner for the DNN Summit logo.
Okay. I don't know if that's coming through really good there on the video, but it is pretty fantastic. I sit there and watch. I was like, what is Brian doing at the book? Oh, he's done. Oh, wow. That's the logo.
I just saw I had a white background and I wanted to have some stuff there. And I'm wearing my DNN Summit speaker shirt from a few years back.
Look at you.
So DNN Summit is coming up. You might think, hey, that's half a year away, but at the same time, it's half a year away.
Oh, by the way, I got OG going on.
Yes, you're wearing DNN Con Palm Beach. We were just talking about Palm Beach.
We were,
It's half a year away. If you have not thought, where am I going to ring in and party in the beginning of 2020? You need to decide right now that you're going to do that at DNN Summit.
It really depends on if Chad comes to the event or not, where you might end up partying.
What?
Well, I think, it was Orlando, right?
Right.
What, it was 2011 or 2012 maybe?
We're talking about DNN Con?
This was DNN World.
DNN World, right, okay.
I think the party got transitioned to the, maybe the county.
I vaguely remember it, and we're talking about Nash here?
We are.
We're
talking about Nash,
So, I'll describe a couple of things there because we in just a minute or two of reminiscing, have mentioned DNN World, DNN Con Palm Beach. There's a pretty good history of having DNN events in Florida.
We've got Will Stroll online.
Will's on.
Who's representing Day of .NET Nuke.
Represent?
Yep. The original, the true OG.
There's a history of having fantastic DNN events in Florida, and we're excited to have 2020 in February, DNN Summit in Orlando. We've got our keynote speaker. We've got our reservations open for the location. We have the ability on the website now for you to sign up as a sponsor. For anyone who's watching this after the fact, if you are a DNN vendor partner, if you are one of the companies that's supporting us and DNN efforts in the community, it's time to consider seriously coming to the sponsor page and taking a look and seeing what kind of package and what kind of level you're interested in sponsoring.
Ryan, didn't your company just recently sponsor, right?
You know, I was behind the times. I thought I was going to be able to say first, but no, I was third or sixth. Just finished posting my sponsorship on Friday, joining you and Quinteros there at the bronze level. In my affirmation of it, I'm part of the DNN community. My company supports the DNN community. We are also there to help put on and present and put on the show for DNN Summit. However, that sponsorship is just the smallest amount that we can do to at least help make it successful and help make it engaging for all the people who do come down. I don't know everyone who comes to and attends DNN Summit, but I can leave knowing that I helped make it good for them, and I made a difference. So if you're a DNN partner, remember that part of your DNN partner agreement is that you'll support DNN community events, and you've got 2 of them that you can be supporting, DNN Connect DNN Summit, and they can both use your attention.
Nice reminder. Nice reminder.
Absolutely, absolutely. And actually, that's a community thing that I can mention. I'm not sure the timing on it because I assume they're going through making meetings, but DNN Partner Program is being renewed right now by DNN Corp, and so I've received a couple of emails and have to do some meetings with folks. So if you are a past DNN partner, if you haven't noticed or seen that communication coming, it should be coming to you soon because they are doing renewals as we speak. Okay, so DNN Summit, register for this, register to come, register to be a sponsor, book your rooms. It's never too early. We will have some things coming up for announcements in the next month or two about some of the social and fun things that are going to be happening, at DNN Summit. I don't know that it's going to be as organized and contained as a ski trip that we've done in the past. But for myself, as a big Star Wars geek and producer of the customized .NET Noob lightsabers, I will encourage everyone to come meet me out at Galaxy's Edge and come out and party when we'll drink blue.
And that's at Hollywood Studio, right?
That's right. All right. Okay, so within the community, coming over to the brand new DNN community website, which I'll continue to call brand new until it's about a year old at least. We have some good information that's come out just recently. Clint, who couldn't be here with us today, he is doing a little bit of traveling right now, so he's out of pocket. But he did post just recently an update for the new DNN MVPs. Every year, the MVP voting process occurs. The community votes for people who've made a difference to them and helped them with DNN. And the way that works is once that list has been created, then the current MVPs vote for who they're going to acknowledge as becoming new MVPs. And there's a little bit of a transition and rollover for current MVPs and past honorary MVPs and then lifetime MVPs. Clint's blog post kind of recognizes the returning MVPs. So this is a long list, and if you go through that list, I'm pretty sure that you're going to recognize, if not everyone in the list, every other person in that list is someone who's made a difference or somehow reached out to you and helped you with DNN in one way or another. But then we also had a collection of brand new MVPs, and I'll kind of zoom in a little bit there to help that be bigger for screen recording. 2 or 3 of these I know personally. Patrick Ryan has helped me out and is a good buddy within the DNN community. He's worked a lot on DNN docs. I know him from my original connections with him in Xmon Pro. So we've worked together and enjoy the things that he brings. A lot of times with some smart workarounds for me to get something done. Mark Saunders is a good friend with 10 Pound Gorilla, and we talk with him every time we're at conferences. Glad to see him added into the list this year. Mandeep Singh, a longtime DNN community member and certainly producer of quality third-party modules. I'm glad to see him in the list. Not wanting to leave them to the last, but Mariette, we got to meet at the MVP meeting just the other day. She's new to the list as well, but I got schooled on Tycho. Tisho was I pulled away from that. No offense meant. There's some childhood toy trucks that are Tycho trucks. That's how you spell Tycho trucks. You have Tonka and Tycho, right? So that was my pronunciation, but Tisho was my takeaway from the MVP meeting. So congratulations and welcome to all the new MVPs. We do have an MVP meeting every month, and so if you need the links to that or need the information for that, you'll find that within the forum area inside of the DNN community website. There's an MVP locked forum that you're able to go into and get the information about the meetings, and essentially we're doing them the week before we do this SoFri. So we're helping sponsor that with a video conference location right now, and that happens essentially on the second Thursday of every month as an MVP meeting in which we talk about the topics of the day, things that need help, things that need work, talk to each other about ideas and what's what we're passionate about in DNN for that particular month. It's a good hangout and a good way to find out what's going on. Speaking of what's going on, we'll kind of round out the information that we're posting or talking about in community to say that just after the MVP meeting last week, DNN 9.4.0 had its official release. David, do you want to talk about that for just a couple seconds?
Nope.
Okay.
No, we're excited this release is out, and quite a bit of contributions, and some of which are fairly major. They're the minimum requirement now for DNN 9.4.0 is .NET Framework 4.7.2. There's some information out there about that that's being published to, I think it's already been merged in on the DNN doc site. So you can find out more information there. There's some new things with GDPR compliancy, with data consent in there. There's some persona bar. Well, you visually won't see any changes for the most part. Most of it's architectural and organization of code and how the builds are. The biggest noteworthy piece of that is that it's significantly faster to install now because of that. Every little extension that used to be in the persona bar has now been rolled in to one because it's not as big of a deal to do that. So that was a major effort. And then I think probably one of the most noteworthy things is dependency injection is now baked into DNN. So if you are coming from .NET Core world or .NET Standard and you're used to using dependency injection, you can now do that within DNN, really within any extension pattern that you want, whether it's a SPA or whether it's MVC or web forms module or Razor, you can use dependency injection. So Andrew Heffling has a blog series out on his website, on his personal website, that goes over this in detail. And I definitely recommend seeing those. One thing that I will note is there have been quite a bit of things discovered after the release that was just not known about upgrade scenarios and some challenges there. You
have a 9.4.1 coming soon, right?
Very soon. We're looking at a very quick release cycle with this. I don't know the exact date, but we're talking about very soon, not like it was with 9.4.0.
I'll kind of describe that I've peeked into it just a small amount, but I don't have a few of my server locations ready for even 9.4.0 at the moment because of the .NET 4.7.2 requirement, where we're running at 4.5 and 4.6. So we've got to do a round of changes before we can even get there. So to some extent, I'm thinking by the time we make some changes, we'll be ready to pick up 9.4.1 when it's out.
What I will say is this is a good opportunity to talk about the need for better testing, better QA in the whole process, and we could really use some help from community. So whenever you see a release candidate come out, go and test it out. Kick the tires pretty good. Take it through its paces.
I wish I had a fantastic, easy way to install a release candidate. Man,
there's
this thing, isn't there?
There is a little thing. Glad you mentioned that. It's MB Quick Site. You can download that for free, and it'll help you install that locally and test. But take it through upgrade scenarios. Install your favorite modules. Test them out. Make sure everything's just working the way you would expect it to work. Add a user to the site. Add a page to the site. Delete a user. Just touching some of those major feature areas will expose potentially issues in that and help us to catch those before the release rather than after the release. So definitely consider that moving forward.
Well, I have just one more community thing to ask about and to talk about before we get into talking about web analytics and what's ahead here. But we have a major event coming up. I need to see who's planning to go for this weekend's major events. We have the rush and bombardment of Area 51 coming up this weekend. Are you planning to go?
Yes. Really? I didn't know about
this weekend. I have some clients in the area, and they're all prepared to just sit back and watch the show and see what happens. They're looking forward to it very much.
All right. Well, there you go. Is it the end of the world again?
Who knows? We'll see.
Okay. All right.
But we are now going to go ahead and pass over presenter role. James, we'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the intro for the topic here. But I will go ahead and bring up on screen 51 degrees. We all know and appreciate the functionality that's been present in DNN for a while as what's possible there with 51 degrees, and so we'll hear a little bit more about web analytics and the the changes that are ahead as far as what's allowable and what's not allowable for tracking.
That's right. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes, sir.
Now, you know when we were doing this little setup and I had to restart my system and dial back in?
Has it happened again?
It's happened again, so I'm going to have to just duck off for 30 seconds and be back. So talk among yourselves, I'll be back in a sec.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Yes, I'm for clips.
I'm kidding for clips. 555-4444. Call me. Saturday Night Live reference there.
I don't know how many other people would know that.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, do me a favor, for those who are online, Mike, I probably have your address, but Mark and James and folks, we do have here in the office our latest swag from Code Magazine. Again, we are part of the .NET Foundation, and because of that sponsorship with .NET Foundation, we receive the Code Magazine, we receive some swag. Basically, every few months I'll gather together a group of those things and I'll mail them out to you. It makes you feel a little bit more like you were joining us in person and getting to hang out when you get a care package from your favorite SoFri community members. So if you want to, in the chat, go ahead and leave me your mailing addresses. I will be putting together a care package here in the next month.
I think James came back on.
Oh, very fast.
Is it working for you now?
He has come back on, and it's done the same damn thing.
You said, you said, hey, is it always that smooth? No, 50% of the time there's a problem.
I did. Let me try one more time.
Okay.
I saw his screen for a moment. Wonder if it's...
I did. See, now he's showing twice on there, so which one is the real James?
Now,
show yourself.
There we go. Hey, Will, I see you on screen now. How you doing? I like the goatee.
I am outstanding. How are you?
I'm doing well. Goodness, you're looking in good shape too. I'm feeling sluggish and lethargic and not fit just by looking at you across the screen.
Well, my goal is to never again get hurt snowboarding.
Is that possible?
Well, the last time I went was the first time I didn't. And also, so I hurt one shoulder the first time and the other shoulder the second time, and this last time we did the thing with the we did this every time, but the last time that we went when you did the inner tube thing, I was on the very back, but the people that were next to me didn't correctly hold on to my tube, and all of a sudden I'm like holding on to an entire group with one arm, and I'm like, my arm is okay. And then
like a whip.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
this is extremely frustrating. I'm going to try. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to restart the computer, and then I'll dial in after that just in case there's something
Ryan,
funny.
why don't we try to dig into your DNN docs thing that you were asking to?
That would be a good idea while we're waiting, coming in and out. One of the things we did in a previous DNN session, SoFri session, and I gotta switch screens here, bear with me a second. One of the things that we did, and do you want to make me presenter again?
We're seeing your screen. Yeah.
Oh, you already did? All right.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things we did was dive into DNN docs so that I could be a guinea pig. And admittedly, I go back and forth. Sometimes I consider myself a developer, and I get into things and do, legitimate heavy lifting development work. But within the sphere of things that I'm comfortable within the sphere of things that I work in every day. And other times, I just consider myself as an integrator because I see that I don't do the things that everyone else is doing as their habit of development. One of the things I'll very honestly say is that I can't stand GitHub. I can't stand the concept of it and the way that it works, and the very act of the things that it does seem to create needless levels of overhead versus just put a file out there and save it and you're done with it. Mm-hmm. But I understand I'm the minority there, and I understand that I'm missing key features and benefits that I should be benefiting from if I would just do things in this method. So this is a challenge to myself to get more familiar with it, because I have a desire to update content and to put things that I care about from old help documents and old resource locations, whether it's the wiki or an old PDF that I have or things, and put them into the new docs location. Beyond that, I also have the added same format in that I work heavily inside of Xmod Pro, and if I want to help with the docs of Xmod Pro, it's the same format, and so I really would want to be in here. So I am learning, and for better or worse, everyone else gets to watch and learn with me. So one of the things that we did last time was I brought several points of ideas of things that I wanted to update, and then after the meeting, I polished them a little bit and I posted them for publish. And I thought what I'd like to do in this meeting is go back and look at those, because I have a few questions about them. I think that one of them got published, but I'm not sure, so I want to talk about how do I tell whether something's been brought in. And then I also have one that I know has a conflict, and it says there needs to be conflict resolution. And I want to talk about what's the process there, because I think I've already forgotten how I'm supposed to go through that process. So let me just ask some very general questions about it. So to begin with, from here, or is it not possible from here and I need to go over to my GitHub account, where can I go to see the contributions that I've made? Like if you wanted to say, hey, I'm going to go back to the things I was editing last month and I want to add in some more edits, do I got to remember where they all were? Do I got to do it from my Git? Can I do it from here? Is there a way to see it?
The best way to do that is from GitHub itself.
Okay, all right.
So you would go out to GitHub at the repo for DNN community /DNN docs, which is the second one there in your list.
Yeah.
And there's a couple places. So you've made pull requests for those changes. So you go to the pull request tab.
So this 4 is my pull requests?
Nope,
or
that's all of them.
That's all of them, right?
Yep.
Okay.
You just happen to be 3 of them right now. So you've got 2 main statuses, open pull requests and close pull requests. So what you can do is you see the filters up there.
Right. I'm
you
looking
can
at all
actually remove
right
the is open there and just type more creative.
Is more creative?
Nope,
or
just more creative. And then hit enter. That happens to be your GitHub username.
It is.
So now it shows you that you have one open and one closed right there, that you're the author on now. It should be showing 4 of them.
Yeah, I was going to say, what? It should be showing more?
Let's see. So you have 3 of them there,
okay.
And then you have 1 in the closed column. I'm not sure. You could use the author drop down there if you'd like, instead of just typing more creative. Maybe that filter doesn't work the way I thought it did. Just remove, just click on pull requests up there. But you can do that. Yeah, do that. That's the way it should be done.
Okay.
So now you've got 3 open and you've got 1 closed.
Author more creative. Got it.
So I didn't have the filter right. So
it could have been the other one was content, and the word had the word more creative in it somewhere.
Yep.
But okay.
Yep. So that's all of the stuff that you have submitted, and one of them has been closed, which means it's either merged or it was closed. In this case, it was merged. So if you click on 1 closed there, or well, you can just click on the 1 closed there.
I don't see one. Oh, 1 closed up
you got
here.
3 open and 1 closed.
Okay, all right.
Just click on 1 closed. That is the one that you did. So if you click on that pull request, you can look through the history of that, and you can tell down at the bottom that in this one, it was actually successfully merged and closed. So now you don't need that branch anymore. So right from here, you can actually delete that branch.
Yes, because if you remember, I created branches by accident, as in I wasn't paying attention or realizing that I could do it a couple of different ways, and I created in a couple of clicks a few different branches.
Yep. Yep. So in this case, go ahead and click delete branch.
Yeah.
You don't need that branch anymore. It's already been merged.
I didn't intend to do other things underneath of it. Now, can I tell from here, though, if there were other changes done underneath the same branch?
Just go ahead and click delete branch right there. We don't need that branch anymore.
Okay.
So all your commits are on the commit tab there. So you don't want to delete your fork because you're planning on contributing more to this. But you can look at commits and you can tell how many commits you made to that branch before it was merged. So that's your commit history. You made 1 commit and it was merged. So great. And it was 1 file changed. So you can click on that tab and see which file you actually changed. There you go. And that was the file you changed. So you updated the Markdown guide to DocFX.
Adding in a few of the things that we learned about in the meeting.
Yep. There you go. So now if you just kind of use the back button and go back to your...
My set.
All right. So there's your 3 open ones.
Right.
It's actually showing you all of them now because you removed
I just went back to the thing, right.
So you've got 2 here that have conflicts. We'll come back to those. You've got 1 that does not have a conflict, and that's that top one there. Update solution options text.
Sorry,
that one,
where are you seeing that they have conflicts or not just from their...
I just know this because I've looked at the
okay.
so.
I'm like, how? Why? Different color icon? What are we looking at here?
Yep.
Okay, all right.
So the one that does not have a conflict, you don't have anything to worry about. But let's talk for just a second. I know Jane's back home, so we'll switch back over to
I
him.
didn't want to dive deep into this, but this is part of what I wanted to learn.
Click on one of these other 2. Click on adding new replacement tokens link, and I'll explain what happened here.
Yeah, this is the one where to get the article in for replacement tokens, we needed to add it to the table of contents list so we can make a link to the new article or to the new page.
Yep.
And so I, that night, made a pull request to that table of contents, added in an item, and then submitted it.
So if we were to go digging and try to figure out where the conflict actually occurred, when you submitted this, it did not have that this branch has conflicts and must be resolved. Because you are working off of a current version of that file. What's going to happen a lot in this project, especially when it comes to table of contents files.
Yeah, common table of contents files.
Yeah, any table of contents file might be managed more frequently than the actual document, itself.
Sure.
So this is going to be a common thing where it was fine when you submitted it, but what happened is somebody else submitted another pull request, and in this case it was Peter Donker, who submitted a massive change to that table of contents file. It got merged prior to yours being merged. So now your starting point is not what the current master branch has.
And that could go in any direction. It could have been my file, it could have been his file. If mine had been merged, his would have had this issue.
Right.
But the whole point of GitHub is that it's easy to sync up these things and tell the differences.
So there's a couple of ways to actually do this. There's the GitHub way, or Git way, I should say. It's not really a GitHub thing, it's a Git thing. To where you can run 4 commands in your command line and it will be magical and it will essentially merge in the current copy of that file from master branch into a new branch that you set up, and you're doing something called no fast forward on it, and it just merges that stuff in, but it keeps your change intact. Then you can
review it and
push that back, and it's all hunky-dory, and we won't have this message. So we can do that as reviewers, But in a case like this, if you go over to your files changed here, this is a simple change where you added one entry, I believe, to the table of contents file.
I could just go grab the
copy
new
that line, submit a new pull request on this file right now, say, hey guys, could you review this pretty quick, get it in there.
Well, part of it is that, this should happen after the article, or after the page is added. Otherwise, the link goes in for something that isn't published. So they should go the other direction.
So,
get the page
so in this case, I mean, if we're being very picky, I would have lumped both of your pull requests in one pull request.
Weren't they?
2 commits. No, you got two. You got one to update the table of contents file, which is what we're looking at here. But that's rows, right? We don't know if that page actually exists, so I don't know if we would just blindly merge that. We'd probably do a validate that that's there and see, oh crap, he's got another pull request that has that file being submitted. If those were in the same pull request, so you modify both of those files at the same time,
we should move on with this.
That's what I would do at this point. So really, I think the bottom line is the two that you have that have conflicts are related to the same
issue.
It's just that you're modifying 2 files. You don't have to create a separate PR pull request for each file. You can do 100 files in one pull request. So that's what I would do, is I would close those PRs.
This one.
This one and the other one.
The other one has new pages to it.
Okay. It's fine, but it also has a conflict as well. So you're going to have to either learn the gateway to merge master into that one and deal with it, which is hard. It's not the easiest thing in the world for somebody that's not too familiar with it. Or you can just copy that file to some place, create a new branch, put that file, figure out what the difference between the new version of that file and your changes are, put those in there, change the table of contents as well in that version, then submit a new PR with those 2 things. That's the quick and dirty, simple explanation. But this is going to happen a lot, especially when there's a table of contents file or a file that's being actively worked on by multiple people.
Okay.
So,
All right, we'll come back into it. James, how are we doing? Your screen display is in good shape?
I'm sending him Switch Presenter now. So.
All right.
We've got to try that and see how we get on. If not, David, I've sent you the slide deck, and we can at least go through that.
Also a good way. Yep.
And I'll just ask you to move to the next slide. Let's see how we go. I've turned my video off, but it's sorry guys. Let's go with the slide deck I sent to David. And,
okay, let me see if I can get this up and running here.
I'll be back in a second.
So let's see. Downloads. Okay, here. And let me make myself presenter here. Which one is the real David? Let's see. It's this one. Okay. And
I'm back. Is that working, David?
Give me just a moment, and I will set this. Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, we've got...
while we're still working on getting it up and running, in the chat I just caught up a little bit, and James mentioned that you use SourceTree. One of my developers put me onto that, and when I was explaining what I wanted and what I was complaining about, he says, oh, you want to use an app. Here you go. And I do feel more at home when I'm looking at things in SourceTree. And I don't get lost there, whereas I do when I'm moving around inside of things in the GitHub site. So I definitely like that as an app as well.
Yeah, we've all got pretty used to it now, but I'm sure there's better, or there will be better things out there. There always are. But choice is good.
What was the name of your slide deck?
It was reasonably long. I think it had Southern Fried DNN on the end of it, and 2019 at the beginning. Top one there.
Top
4 up.
3 files up.
There
you go.
Okay. Here we go.
Let's do it.
Okay. Right. So we'll at least get this bit done, and then we'll see how we get on with some live coding when we get to that point. Okay, thank you, David. So we can skip through that one. That's our intro slide. So I'm going to go through this in 3 parts, really. One is looking at my journey into privacy. How did I start to find out some of the things I found out and that I'm going to be sharing with you today. Look at what's changing on the web. There's been quite a few changes in Firefox and Apple's approach to privacy, and also what's changing in the world of regulation. And then thirdly, if we can, we'll move on and look at what we can do about it in DNN. So if we skip on, my sort of journey to privacy started with 51 Degrees. This is a company I started commercially in 2011. We provide device specification information to website operators, people who produce apps, and telecoms operators now as well. Our clients are many and varied. If we skip on to the next slide, we've got publishers, CMS platforms, ad tech companies. A lot of those brands, particularly the ones perhaps the people on this call won't necessarily recognize off the top of their head. A lot of them are ad tech brands that sit in the background and are responsible for programmatic advertising and that kind of thing. So particularly the publishers and particularly the ad tech businesses sort of got me into the world of privacy, because it's such a hot topic for them. They're really under the cosh now. Business models are being threatened. So the stuff we're talking about today, whilst it's going to be an irritation to the people watching this, it's actually fundamentally changing their business models around what they can do with personal data and sharing personal data. So if we skip on, where sort of 51 Degrees comes into this world is we get plugged into these platforms, particularly publishers' platforms and ad tech company platforms, and we're supporting them by giving them information about the device. The most simple and trivial use case is it a mobile or not? Typically they're using more sophisticated data now, and also passing that information off to analytics platforms. And as soon as personal data gets involved in there, whilst 51 Degrees' product isn't about personal data, we've deliberately kept it away from personal data, that's when we start to get involved. So if we skip on to sort of some of the information that they're using, we've got sort of processes and pricing and dates and all this sort of information is available. If we can skip on again, I'm just going to skip over this in the interest of time because we're a little bit late starting. Those businesses are taking all that data and putting it into this ecosystem. So this is a little diagram that's supposed to simplify the world of programmatic advertising. I'll let you guys be the judges to whether that simplifies it for you or not.
I was thinking it didn't look very simple.
No, it's kind of yeah, it kind of says it all, really. There's a lot of middlemen, but we sort of sit in this space as a data supplier within this world, and therefore we come into contact with a lot of the other boxes that you can see there, and they're putting this data in alongside personal data. So if we skip on to the next slide, you'll see they do sort of analysis around viewability, for example. So these days, who would have thought you only get paid as a publisher if the ad got viewed by a human? Yeah, that wasn't always the case, but that's pretty much the case now. So things like viewability, that varies by chipsets and things like that. So across the x-axis there, we've got the different chips that appear in mobile devices, and these days mobile phones are really just someone's chip with someone else's plastic put around the side and a logo put on it. There's about 45 popular chipsets that go into devices now. Another example would be price versus age of device, which is on the next slide. So these advertisers will be looking at different segmentation based on the capabilities of the device. So this sort of problem has dragged me into this world of privacy. It gets me to go to events, particularly those in London, where regulators are presenting and people are talking about these kind of problems. And back in July, it became apparent to me that there were some changes that certainly I hadn't been aware of that were going to have a fundamental impact, not just on the businesses that we've just been looking at and the kind of scenarios we've just been looking at, but on the web professionals in general, all of us. So if we skip on, and skip on again, I've kind of likened it to a set of scales. Where we were at the end of last year in Europe after GDPR is we'd reached a sort of balance. So citizens' rights were being protected by regulators, and the key thing about the regulation was consent, and most respectable businesses had put in place a consent box, basically, and you had to have a privacy policy, so you had to go and explain what all your cookies do and who you send data to, and you know, it's a bit annoying, you'd rather not do it, but it's not unreasonable to be able to say, you know, what your website is doing, particularly if you're capturing address information or credit cards and things like that. So I think we'd sort of reached a balance where businesses could understand this was probably a good thing, better to play ball, and citizens sort of felt they were, or the regulator on behalf of citizens felt that the law was right. So if we flick on, you can see how we implement this on our website. So in the bottom left-hand corner, you've got a little fairly typical box on a European website that's saying we do stuff with cookies and possibly stuff with personal data. Read this policy. So that's the first part of our privacy policy. I think that's the first page of 5 pages. So it's I doubt anyone other than us has ever actually read it, but nevertheless, we have to have that there. And you click accept, and everything's good. But that changed in July, and if we skip on to the next slide, I've moved the scales. So we now have version 2 regulation. That's my term, not the regulator's term, but it's the revised cookie policy. It's building on GDPR and something called PECA, which is the underlying European privacy rules, and it's going to the next level, and I'll explain what that means in a second. And what we've also got is the technology companies getting involved now, because after Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, when people think about privacy, they're thinking about manipulating elections and things like that. But of course, we're all tarred with the same brush. So the technology vendors, the browser vendors, are now getting involved, and privacy is a major part of their roadmap. And in the most recent releases of their browsers, we're starting to see that. And again, I'll go through that in a minute. So things are kind of out of balance now. We've got to decide, how do we respond as businesses and as people who help businesses. So if we flick on.
Yeah, he clicked one thing and we're trying to come back to it. There we go.
Okay. We've got the technical gremlins today. They're not being kind to us. So we've got these two aspects. The Information Commissioner with the revised cookie guidance, and we've got the browser vendors. So if we move on and look at the Information Commissioner first, on the next slide, you'll see there's a URL at the bottom there, and if you could open that URL, you're going to see exactly the experience that every website should be producing going forward. Yep. So if you're going to comply with the law, that bad boy on the left is what you're going to need to have. I think all of you can see that. Some of you will be reading that. And what we can see there is analytics cookies. We'd like to set analytics cookies to help us improve our website by collecting and reporting information on how you use it. For more information on how these cookies work, please see our cookies page. And you've got to turn that to on. It cannot be on by default. That's the way it's going. If you read through the page, if you do save and close, you'll now get rid of that. I have asked the ICO how many people do what you just did there, turning it to on. I imagine most people want to find the save and close and get out of it as quickly as possible. And I've included this page in the presentation. It's just quite a short page that they've put together as sort of a myth buster. So rather than reading the full guidance, reading through this is pretty useful, pretty way of just finding out what's happening. So there's no getting away from that unless you're happy to ignore what the regulator is mandating. So that's quite significant. Now let's move on to the technology companies. I flick on from here, thank you. So WebKit, Apple's rendering engine, now has a tracking prevention policy. And I've just taken an excerpt from the web page that's linked at the bottom there. This is just telling you some of the unintended impacts of this tracking prevention policy. So we can see things like fraud prevention, bot detection, analytics in the scope of a single website is going to be impacted by this. Single sign-on is going to be impacted by this. So Apple have made a conscious decision that they're valuing privacy over those sorts of features, and they're titling them unintended impact. We do a lot of work with Apple. We have to identify Apple devices. Apple devices are not easy to identify. Apple have gone out of their way to make every Apple product look exactly the same. So iPad OS from today, I think it's rolling out. iPad OS 13, all iPads will appear as desktops in Google Analytics, for example.
Wow.
So those of you who are looking at analytics, you're going to, particularly if you've got a high volume website, you might see a shift of 4 or 5% towards desktop over the next week or two. That's the sort of thing that Apple are introducing as unintended consequences, effectively, of the changes that they're making. When I make that statement, I'm assuming that the last beta they put out is going to contain exactly the same features as the final one that they roll out. You never know; they might have reversed that change at the end, but I doubt it. It wouldn't be in keeping with this policy. If we move on, we can see Mozilla's policy in this regard. Not quite as punchy when it comes to these things. A little bit harder to read, but they're using a list produced by Disconnect Me. And basically, if you're unlucky enough as an analytics package or a provider of web services to get listed in Disconnect Me as put on the blacklist, basically, then any website that's using that service is automatically going to be blocked. The cookies are going to be blocked. So this is quite significant stuff. If we move on, I've taken some screenshots as part of my precautionary Plan B presentation, where I wasn't able to drive and use my browsers. So just before starting this presentation, I just had a look at your website. So this is in Firefox. What you'll see in Firefox now is this little shield. So just next to the eye, you'll see there's a shield there to the left of the URL. And if you click on that shield, this is the information that comes up. So that's the one, thank you. You'll see some information coming up. So you can see content blocking. This is now enabled by as standard, effectively, and we can see that there are trackers and cookies. Now, the good news is, certainly I feared that the first implementation of standard would go a little bit further than it's actually gone. So what's actually happening in standard is the cookies for tracking are being blocked, but Google Analytics itself is still able to get some information. So it's not making us blind, as we thought might happen with version 69 of Firefox. But it's certainly removing the cookie. So the fidelity of information, the ability to connect multiple sessions together back to the same browser, a lot of that sort of information is now going to be lost.
Time on page is part of what Google Analytics picks up through cookies, isn't
it? They time the page, and then they use the cookies to track multiple events. To be honest, Google Analytics is damn clever. They use multiple ways of doing things, and perhaps some of that will be able to persist. But remember, if we're on an ICO compliant website, it doesn't really matter what Mozilla and Apple are doing. We're not supposed to enable this stuff anyway without consent. If we had the browser and I could bring up Firefox for you, if you were to go into manage content blocking, I don't know if you have that on your machine, David.
You started Siri, and Siri is now.
Oh, I'm getting ready to see.
Siri's now installing Firefox. Fantastic. If we were to go in there, you could see
I don't even have
the section under privacy. It's pretty prominent. If you go into private browsing, then all your analytics is off anyway. But it's very, very easy to switch on strict mode and turn the whole lot off. And what that does is stop the Google Analytics includes actually being added to the page. So just nothing from Google will get through onto your web page.
He's already explained it all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So what do we do about it? If we move on.
I like your breakdown.
Yeah, it's fairly basic. So there's do nothing. It'll probably be okay. I mean, for you guys, if you're working as far as the regulators are concerned, you're not under their jurisdiction. Will this come into extensions of Hippo and stuff like that? I don't know. I mean, that would involve commentary on the sort of political situation and the will of governments and stuff like that, which is all a bit up in the air at the moment. So, do nothing. It's certain that around the browser technology, there's going to be a limiting of the data that's going to be available. And, of course, if the regulator is getting involved, then and you have to comply with it, then you're going to lose a huge amount of data. As I say, I'm still waiting for the ICO to respond and tell me how many people enable that yes button and how much analytics they've actually been getting over the last couple of months. So if we accept it, the thing I find most offensive is that horrible consent dialogue that comes up the first time you go to a website. It's just, if you're going to read a story from a publisher, and that's the first thing you see, it's just a really bad experience. And limited people are going to accept it, and therefore we've got considerably less data. So I'm of the view, and have been of the view, those of you who've known me for any length of time, that there's just far too much JavaScript in the world, and the world's a better place with less JavaScript. And one of the ways that we can deal with this problem is to move the analytics server side. That removes some JavaScript. Of course, the problem with JavaScript, besides the issues of single-threaded, slow, lots of JavaScript being pasted in, not playing nicely with each other, all that kind of stuff, is browser vendors can disable it. They can stop it arriving. They can interfere with it. It's a bit of the Wild West. Ryan?
To ask the question, because I'm not sure I followed the direction you were going there, that going server-side allows you to continue and to maintain your control over what you're doing and how you're trying to track whatever you can track. But isn't that skirting the intent of what the regulators are trying to do, as in they're trying to make it that you have to ask people's permission before you can track them. If you're moving to server-side and you don't have to ask questions...
Well, you're not tracking them because...
yeah, what...
That's their browser.
That's a great question. That's a great question.
Yourself and what you're putting out, and it's more about what you're putting out
You're
instead of whoever it is.
in that sense, you know, that it's not literally on your computer at that point.
Okay. Give me a minute to mull that over. It'll percolate.
Well, I can answer your question. So, what are we talking about here? So we're talking about personal information. Okay, so is analytics inherently personal information? Well, it may be or it may not be, depending on what it is that you're collecting. So let's take an example. IP addresses are now deemed personal information. They're not always personal information, but because they can sometimes be personal information, because they always relate to your home and you're the only person who lives in that home, then they're therefore personal information. Latitudes and longitudes. For the same reason, if we're in a Starbucks, they're not personal information. If we're in our home, then they could become personal information, particularly because it's easy to combine with a postal database to turn it into a postal address. So GDPR is only concerned, and the regulator is only concerned with personal information, but the definition of personal information is quite broad. So Google Analytics, you have a little map that comes up of the world, and it will show you where your traffic's coming from. That is worked out by using the IP address to do a reverse geocode lookup. So if we don't send the IP address to Google, then there's no personal information that is being sent to Google. Therefore, privacy regulation doesn't apply. But by default, by putting analytics onto the web page, an IP address is being provided to Google. Okay. So the revised cookie guidance is specifically about cookies and things that are written into the browser. And the guidance, if we were to go back and do a forensic read of that web page that I've put in the slide deck, if we were to do that, what we would see is it is all about, it's about cookies. It's about what is essential to make the web page work. Now, if it's in my mind logically essential to be able to serve a web page, that is the purpose of the transaction. Effectively, is to provide data back that we call a web page. So if we're recording that in a log file, like some of us used to do back in the days when AW Stats was the only way of analyzing log files and getting you information before Google Analytics came along, then no cookies are being involved. It's part of the essential process of serving the web page. And as long as you're not sending any private personal data, then privacy rules don't apply. It just gets aggregated as part of your analytics. Now, the very first slide in this presentation that I didn't emphasize particularly has a little bit about I'm not qualified to give legal advice. Okay, I'm sharing my interpretation through discussions I've had with industry professionals and lawyers. And I think the problem with all of this is that the regulator is certainly in Europe is taking this approach of, well, we're going to provide the guidance, we're going to get it written into law, but until it's actually tested in the courts, some of these things are going to be a bit ambiguous. So we were just discussing at the top of well, before we started the meeting, there's another case by a company called Fashion ID, and that's the conclusion of that is that the inclusion of Facebook like buttons on a web page forms a relationship between the website operator and Facebook, where the website operator is responsible for Facebook complying with GDPR, and Facebook are responsible for the website complying with GDPR. They've effectively become joint data controllers. That has massive implications, as you can imagine. So this is very, very difficult to get clarity on. So I don't think there's ever going to be a concrete answer to your hypothesis right.
Interesting. But you also reminded me of something that I hadn't thought of in a long time, but we used to track things before cookies, and it was standard or common. So this is possibly end run back to life before cookies, or at least for tracking.
Absolutely. I mean, Google have this API called the Measurement Protocol. It's been around about 8 or 9 years. It was originally built so that apps and non-web things could be tracked within Google Analytics, and you could benefit from the power of that. In 2014, as part of my trying to explain there were other ways of doing things than JavaScript, basically to improve performance, I wrote a blog for Smashing Magazine about how to move your analytics server-side using Measurement Protocol. And what I'm possibly going to be able to show you is the integration I've done with DNN to move your analytics server-side. And maybe we can give that a go in a minute. But I see there's a few questions in the chat. I don't know if any of those are worth taking before we attempt to do that.
It's a good question. Let me bring a couple of them to you to maybe answer or work into your next points of conversation.
Okay.
One of them is kind of around what we were just talking about, and it was that privacy data laws normally don't state the technology used or how you collect the data. It's more just about the process of whether that data is collected or not and what's done with it. Isn't that more often the case?
Yep, absolutely. So I referred to the observation of IP address earlier. Mm-hmm. So if you take the IP address, turn it into a location, and send the location to Google, and it's Charlotte, for example, as the town, then that's not personal information. If you send the IP address and get Google to do it, then that's personal information. Google become a data processor as long as they don't retain the data, and you have an obligation to tell the person as part of consent that they're consenting to that activity happening by Google.
I believe it was Mike said earlier about IIS and IIS logs, and I was going to chime in to describe that, yeah, within other systems and other things that cannot track by cookies, I think of email marketing where you do tracking pixels all the time. That was part of how very early days email marketing was tracking opens, was whether GIFs and 1 pixel images were being loaded inside of email content, and that was used to do, it wasn't robust, but it was fairly reliable tracking for some good different sets of data. So how about that and just simple things like IIS logs? With the data and the information that's stored inside of those, does that become...
Did you just say simple things like IIS logs?
Well, I was thinking of the tracking pixel with the simple, and that all it's doing is doing view count and request dates. Yeah. That's about the best you can do. It doesn't even have a history log. It's just count of requests, right? But thinking about IIS logs, you have IP addresses. You have other things like that stored there, and half the time, you just have those running. You're not paying attention to them. You didn't customize them, and they're just running your IIS logs. Are those going to come under concerns and issues here with this?
Yeah, if you're recording IP address, then that's personal information. So if you, I doubt your IIS logs have people's names and addresses. You'd have to do some serious voodoo to get that in there. But so yes, I mean, effectively, you're storing personal information. We've noticed, we're pretty big users of Microsoft Azure, and we've noticed in the DevOps interfaces you can't get IP address in logs anymore. It just aggregates it up to town, the city level.
Interesting.
So, yeah, there's a lot of implications, and I think this is where the regulator, the practical implementation of some of this stuff is actually quite hard. Are the regulators really going to go after small businesses? No, it's certainly in Europe they're after Facebook and Google, but they're going to get below that and particularly these ad tech companies, anyone who has a business model that requires this sort of stuff is definitely going to suffer, and the rest of us, if we want to be seen to be compliant. No one wants to be, having people say, no, you're not respecting privacy. That's going to be a challenge.
So that was more of the questions that were in chat. There's some more that are bigger conversations that we can bring into when we get into the open discussion sides of things. So let's dive in server side, I think.
Well, we're going to have to test our technology again because I need to bring up my interface. I think it would be very painful for us to watch David have a key by key request from me.
I could give you control over my Windows environment if you want Visual Studio or anything like that, but I don't think I have your code. So.
Yeah, this thing's doing it again. It's just freezing.
It worked so beautifully when we tested.
Yeah.
It did. It was my fault. I tempted the gremlins by saying how smooth it was. What we can do you have remote desktop on your machine, David?
I do.
Okay, if I dial back in and I take control of your desktop, I can link to my remote desktop and we'll see how we get on.
2 hops.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean remote access into my desktop? No, I can't.
I can't do that. Okay.
Yep.
I
can remote desktop into something else, but yeah.
Oh no, that's what I mean. Sorry. So if I can take control of your desktop, I can link to my desktop.
Oh yeah.
My
absolutely.
other.
Yeah.
I've got another desktop. I do all my stuff in the cloud.
That works. Yep.
Okay. Let's try that. Hold on. I'll reconnect.
Yeah, while we're
well, you
doing
should.
that.
I don't know if you have to reconnect. Let me just.
Yeah, you just give you control.
Let's see. How are we going to do this? I can't give you control.
While they're working some parts of this out, let's have some of those sidebar conversations. Will, you were mentioning some things that are more similar to email marketing restrictions. We all know that we can't automatically sign people up. We know we have can spam compliancy, and people have to register and confirm that they want to be part of a list. And you kind of described that PII isn't really present until you've combined together certain fields and information. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, it depends on the jurisdiction, and this is more relevant before GDPR became a thing, because GDPR changed everybody's life. But before that, so like if, for example, in the state of Florida, there's almost no law in general about how you if you have first name and last name and email address, there's really no restriction to it, and it doesn't matter if you're opt in, opt out, and save the email address, add somebody to the email, whatever, automatically. There's no restrictions really. But if you are in Florida and you have clients coming from California and you store the first name and the last name in the same location as the email address, you're now you're supposed to, not everybody does this, in fact, very few people do this, but you're supposed to store those in an encrypted fashion because they're all together, right? So
yeah.
you should not be able to read the email and the first and last name in clear text where it's stored. And so it doesn't matter if your company resides in California or not. But very few people even realize that's a law.
Yeah, I thought you were going to go down the path of CAN-SPAM compliancy and registration for email marketing information to come to you. You're really talking about the core of it, just storing the data in a responsible way. Yeah.
Yeah. So like for example, we have some clients. When our first client asked for this, we were like, wow, this is actually kind of overkill, but that's cool. We'll do it anyway, But since then, we've started to do it when possible, when the client agrees and has the budget for it. We started to store user profile information in a separate database altogether. And where it's stored there, it's just automatically encrypted, right? So So that way, if somebody compromises DNN for some reason or somehow they don't have the PII readily available, now they have to also go hack this other database.
Right. It's one more hurdle level of activity they have to perform just to get some usable data.
Exactly. Yeah.
Years ago, we worked inside of a data center here in the Charlotte, North Carolina area that was proud to boast that they had 1/3 of the data for Wachovia, and that was the point. That was the point of their information. Was they said, yes, we have 1/3 of the data, and when you would describe that, people would say, oh, you know, how many records? And no, we have 1/3. So we might have first name, and another company has last name, and we might have email address, and someone else has the city, and then a third company has the state and the zip, and that data is 3 separate data centers in completely different locations that's all brought together to make an accurate record.
Now that is overkill.
Yeah, James, I have that screen open there, so you should be able to do desktop. There you go.
Cool. You guys keep chatting. Let me see if I can get this set up.
Okay.
James, if you have any trouble, you know, with the fact that it's a Macintosh, I completely agree with you. I understand your frustration.
And I will let you delete this when you get done. So.
Thank you.
Oh, you'll let him.
That's what I'm saying anyway. You know.
So I'm going to concentrate on this for a second. So you guys carry on.
Mike was talking a little bit about data as well, and he was the one who was talking about logs earlier. You read what his latest mention here was. Yeah, PCI compliance, personal information, PII information. To some extent, James, from this side of the pond, it's very easy to be on the side of people who look and really wonder what all the fuss is about GDPR and why everything went so far in this direction, and that it's overkill, you know, too far in the sense of you can't do business as usual. You have to trip over yourself to have people approve, and then to one of your earlier screens, now it's continuing on another step too far. So I don't know. To some extent, it's very nice to be able to relax and think, okay, this isn't going to hit us that bad yet. Eventually it will, and eventually it will, and eventually it'll make a big difference.
Let's just hope that when it does hit, it doesn't hit where it hurts, right? You know, because of negligence or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, in my opinion,
Well, look,
conversation is just an earlier version of accessibility, and we see how long that's taken for it finally to make its impact, like with all these, what is it, like 800 lawsuits last year. And
that's a great point.
Taking. So this is not something that we should completely ignore, but it's going to take some time for it to catch up to us. But when it does, it's going to cost us.
Yeah, it's a great point.
And I think, you know, it's just being aware and talking to your clients and just getting their view on it, because ultimately they're the people who are accountable.
To some extent, I feel that there will be a divide of clients who realize the next level that's going to be necessary, and they might look at it and say, you know what? Were we really using analytics that much? Were we really doing any decisions based off of it? We really weren't. It was there. It was convenient. It was free from Google. You know what? I don't think we're going to miss it. And they'll back away. Whereas if you're serious about marketing and you're serious about advertising, then you're going to step up and you're going to move to the game. So it might separate a divide.
Yeah. In the blog post I wrote on this, I did put one of the options is to reduce the headcount in your web analytics marketing team. You know, just let them go and do something else.
That's a practical approach,
yeah. So marketing courses will have to be rewritten. But we have a solution in front of us, or at least the beginnings of a solution. So would you like me to go through this?
I'd love to.
Okay. So what we have is a little project that I've put together here. And what we're doing is we're taking a NuGet package that has come. Oh.
It just
moved
working.
Yes, it's still working. Good. So there's a little NuGet package that Ion Sapoville put together, Google Measurement Protocol. So it's a package that basically allows you to use Google Measurement Protocol. It does all the validation for you within the package, and it's just a very nice way of passing data to Google. So I've used that, and because I'm that kind of person, I've not included it as a NuGet package. I've just taken it from GitHub because I wanted to actually look at the code and possibly be able to see what was going in under the hood. So that's what this project is here. It's a .NET Standard package. And then what I've done is I've created a generic class for web forms that there's a real lag for me. So sorry, just
you have to go slow at first.
Yeah, we're going all the way over the Atlantic and then all the way back again.
Right? You know, you're controlling somebody else's computer from the other side of the world.
Yeah.
We got to complain about it.
Yeah, and we're then controlling one back again on the other side of the world.
Right.
Yeah. But at least you can see my screen now, all because I've got some buggy application on here or something. So what we've got here is a class. It's passed in an HTTP context. Framework and .NET Core are very different, as you all know. So HTTP context part of system.web, system.web not part of .NET Core. So I've just done this for Framework for the moment. And what this method is doing is it's looking at context, and it's going through and it's pulling all the information into that Google Measurement Protocol project that I was showing earlier. So you can see the sort of information that we're populating. Measurement protocol is pretty well documented. So this is a list of all the different values that you can pass in. And those of you who use Google Analytics a lot, you'll be pretty used to seeing how this manifests itself in the user interface. So that's what the send method is doing. This is a class that's designed to be used as a singleton. So when it's constructed, it's passed a tracking ID. And I'll come on to explain these little functions in a minute. So that's effectively what's happening there. So we now need to plug it into something. So what I've done is taken the default.aspx.cs page as part of DNN. I'm sure you guys are far more familiar with that than I am. And I've just added an unload event. And what I'm doing is saying, okay, well, analytics, we shouldn't do that at the beginning. We shouldn't be doing anything with analytics until we've actually dealt with sending the page to the user. I've made a basic attempt of saying don't send analytics for things that are in edit mode or where there's a super user that's logged in and things like that. What I've done, I'll come back to that in a minute, is then we just call send and pass in the context, and that's going to pass over the information to Google Analytics. So I'm just going to run that, and then I'll come back to this code and explain some of the other little features that are going on. So I'm starting up, I'm going into Firefox. This is standard Firefox, which would normally be blocking the Google tracking cookie. And what I've also got configured here is Google Analytics real-time. So we should be able to see when this page loads up. So that's loaded. If I now go back into Analytics, we can see we've got our first hit coming through there. Yeah, so that's coming from the server. And just to prove that, if I just put a breakpoint in there and then come back to the page, and now let's go across to, say, page 1. There's my breakpoint being hit, and if I do continue, we should see that page switch across there to page 1. Okay, So that's all coming from the server. None of that's coming from JavaScript. No JavaScript's involved in this at all. What happens at the top of default.aspx is we create that singleton earlier that I showed earlier here. So I'm just taking the tracking ID from the web.config file. Now what I've just been thinking about is, in order to make this quite flexible so that it could be plugged into other platforms, is just pass in some functions that can go and get certain information that will be specific to the CMS. So in the case of DNN, I've got the active tab title being responded to in title, and that's why we just set this object called GA page, just by convention, that gives us a default page that we can then use to return the title. Or user ID, if someone was logged in, we could take the user ID. That would pass the information on user ID to be the DNN user ID rather than any other user ID. So that's quite neat.
And that's we're getting user ID. That in itself isn't personal information tracking-wise. It's just because it doesn't have IP address, it doesn't have location. So you are able to track the person, but because you're doing it by a different method, it doesn't have the same problem.
No, it does. It would still be personal information, but as part of your terms and conditions of signing up to the website,
right,
you're going to be giving a name, an email address, and stuff like that. So at that point, consent can be accepted because you're entering into a transaction, a deeper relationship with someone.
Reading through that novel of information and accepting it would be a lot more palatable if you were doing it during a registration process and perhaps on a login page when you log in, versus just having it be present so that you can browse the website and have it be part of your tracking analytics. Okay.
Yep.
I get that.
Yep. Yep. I've just seen in the chat window whether we can make the code bigger. Does anyone know how to do that?
Yeah, bottom left here, I can do it for you real quick.
Can you try? Oh, there we go. I knew that. There you go. Thank you. Yeah, so that's how we deal with that problem with user ID. There are other problems though. So one of the things I'm looking at with this code is, if we come down to IP address that we talked about earlier, there's one more thing I want to show you as well. So what we're doing is getting the user host address. Well, this is clearly going to be personal information because it's the IP address. What I would want to do here is change this so that it does the lookup for the location here. So an IP address doesn't actually need to be sent to measurement protocol because we're sending the actual location, and we're doing that rather than letting Google do that.
So it might be used in the generation of a location city or area, but because it's not being stored, it's less of a concern because it was used just in the middle process but not part of what was stored, right?
Yeah, and it's not being passed to a third party. In this case, Google Analytics.
Depends on how you're getting that geocoding, though, right?
Oh yes, that would. Yeah, so if you called IP info in order to get the location, then you've got the same problem. Yeah, but if you're using MaxMind and you've got that deployed within your own environment, then it's not being passed to anyone else. Okay.
SQL Server, from some extent, has an ability to do some geocoding built into it. I don't know where that falls.
Well, if it's in your environment, it's not going to any other party, and you're in control, then the data stays between you and the person accessing your website.
Okay, interesting.
So, yeah, this isn't just about code. This is about the law and interpretation of the law. One of the other things I've done, if you really don't want to use cookies, it's just a very simple way of creating something that's a sort of client ID. So taking the user agent and hashing that, and then adding the IP address as bytes to that client ID, possibly doing something where we obfuscate it so it can't be reversed back again. and that forms a sort of session ID where you don't use Microsoft Session ID.
Yeah, and you're not exactly making it GUIDs, but you're making it something, reasonably unique and short.
Yeah, yeah. So it's reasonably unique. I think that's the key thing. But for analytics, it doesn't have to be completely unique. Better to have something than nothing.
Yeah, for sure, right?
Yeah. So that's a little bit of the code. It's a bit of a work in progress. We're taking the view that this is something we're aiming to do within the next 6 months. So we want to take Google Analytics and all the social media buttons and things like that out of the website, move them server-side, and make sure that we are fully compliant with GDPR.
Interesting.
Not just, sorry, we are already fully compliant with GDPR, but to ensure that we are compliant with the revised cookie policy during the kind of implementation grace period that the ICO have set businesses.
So what's the title, what's the catchphrase of what we're calling this? We can say GDPR because we've said it enough times now, it rolls off the tongue. This relating analytics and PII, this is just phase 2. This is, what was the wording that we can call this?
This is the revised cookie guidance as part of something.
Guidance.
Yeah, it's snappy, isn't it? Yeah. It's part of PECA, which is the European regulation. PECR.
PACR, okay, all right. I could probably say Packer would be more marketable. Maybe if we.
Clint's here, you'd say Packer.
Right. Well,
Packer.
I don't know. I was thinking Pac-Man and Packer. Okay, so I wanted to say what we were calling this. I stepped out for just a moment. With what you started us off with, you kind of went to your code and you were building this. In what way did you say you were working towards this in a release soon? You were saying that you're going to help create some ways for DNN sites to easily use this technology?
So what we want to do is package this piece here, which is called Framework. We need a better name for that. It's a bit overused, the word framework, isn't it? But that's
web
the
analytics framework or something.
Yeah, exactly. So for Google Analytics, we would look to take this code that we've put together here, make that a NuGet package, and then make it easy to add into other .NET CMSs and other .NET platforms. So we'd make this page view bit would be ubiquitous, and then you could plug it into Umbraco, Kentico, Epi, DNN.
Yeah.
All
those previous ones were rubbish except for the DNN part. So we got to see then the replacements for several types of actions. Number one, just tracking in general, analytics tracking in general, and roughly hit counts. We got to see tracking users, whether logged in users by the DNN user ID, which in many cases would be better data than you would have today otherwise, or reasonably unique session IDs. And then we were also seeing location, and the idea that we're taking the IP address and we might get locations out of that and then store it in a more user-readable way anyways. To some extent, I get the feeling that I'm seeing benefits. I'm seeing things that I think, oh, that would be better analytics anyways, or that would be easier for a human to digest. I'm seeing some things that are positive outcomes rather than seeing the hassle that we're having to go through versus just plugging in Google Analytics and then forgetting about it. What about everybody else here so far?
Well, I think
time to open up for some of our larger discussion and gripe fest over the situation.
If I can just respond very, very quickly, I think that there is some fidelity that's lost with a server-side approach, particularly around events and things like that, in order to make it so particularly if you use React or Angular and things like that, you would need to build another layer that basically meant that those events were passed to the server and then the server passed them to measurement protocol.
Yes.
So it becomes a little bit more complicated. It's totally doable. All I'm doing is showing how it would work for page views, but that would be another layer of sophistication that would need to be used. And I think the key is to make it all first party if you can, so that we're not dealing with third party cookies, third party includes, stuff like that.
You'd be creating a handler page or a handler call that you could use to pass that data to from Angular or React actions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a handler would be exactly the way to do it.
What parting information do you have to get us started in our roundtable? And I think maybe we pass the ball around for a few minutes.
Well, I have a question. So we talked a bit about what, regulations and all that, but what about browsers themselves? Can you talk a bit about where the state of each major browser is at this point? From my understanding, Firefox is at a place, Apple Safari is at a place, but there's not a whole lot going on with Google Chrome for obvious reasons. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, so I think we've got a spectrum. On the kind of extreme privacy side is the Brave browser, which is a relatively new browser that is all about privacy. It's got ad blocking built in. It is the browser to use if you don't want anything to be leaked that could be leaked if you're sort of concerned about those things. Clearly, Firefox and Apple are going after this. I think they see it as a marketing kind of USP, effectively, to be the private browser. And Apple have been doing this for some time.
Yeah.
Google and Microsoft with Edge are doing similar things, but they're perhaps 6 months behind where Firefox are. But with the cadency of browser releases, though, it doesn't take long to catch up if this gets to the top of the list by the product manager. And I think Google in particular, and Microsoft to a lesser extent, have to show that they take privacy seriously. So I don't think we can say, well, these sorts of features are not going to become the norm. I think it's sort of quite the contrary. In fact, you could envisage a situation where somehow the regulator was able to do a deal with the browser vendors to make all the browsers have to enforce the functionality. That would actually create a better user experience, interestingly, because you could kind of consent. You could have a sort of consent option within the browser.
Would that imply then that the individual website owners themselves wouldn't have that same level of responsibility, because they would know that every delivery means possible, the browsers, was already taking care of it, and therefore they weren't. I think you're probably right, Ryan. It wouldn't meet their high standard as far as informed consent was concerned. But I also think maybe there'll be a bit of a user backlash if every time you go to the web you see the same old page that I showed you earlier. Yeah, talk about that for a minute, because you opened with that and said that you felt like you were very pleased by GDPR and creating a balance that wasn't there before, and now maybe things have tipped a little bit too far in the other direction, or maybe this is a little extreme. What is the sense of that, do you feel?
Well, I think that I'll just bring up the website now. So if we go to the ICA's website, there we go. So I think user interface designers, user experience experts, they hate this.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate it. You all hate it. And the reality is, when every website starts doing this, if that was what to happen, then there's going to be a backlash from users, because people are going to hate it as well. So I don't think it's been fully thought through. I don't have all the answers.
So as it relates to internet advertising, pay-per-click and things like that. This is an area that we're very concerned about, when it comes to tracking and web analytics and how that plays a role into all that. What say you on that aspect of it, and what should agencies that's a core part of their business, what should they be most concerned about there, or most being prepared for?
So the internet has grown through advertising. So big car brands, pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, finance companies, they've funded to a great extent the growth of the internet. I mean, Google's probably the biggest example of that. I think their revenues are 3 or 4 times WPP, and they just deal with digital advertising. WPP do everything else. So I think what the regulator's trying to do is not to stop those businesses. They're not trying to prevent good innovation and that kind of stuff. What they're trying to do is give people control. And I think there is a whole shady side of that business, of that sector, effectively, where people's sort of data is being traded, that is going to have to stop. And I don't think that's a bad thing for society to deal with that. I think it's the unintended consequences of dealing with that are kind of what we're seeing here. We're seeing that washing up on our shores as good web developers, good professionals.
There are some relatively new technologies in banner advertising that won't be able to continue forward under this new model. The whole idea that you can have bidding for ads and for views of live people clicking through is going to be decimated by this type of control.
So I'll give you an example of where we're already getting hit big time. With some of our larger clients where we're doing highly targeted advertising through Facebook and Instagram and things like that. The whole benefit of that is being super targeted, on certain demographics and data-driven kind of things. We're already having to get very creative on some of that stuff to even be effective.
Right, the same way you were 2 years ago.
Because of this stuff that's requiring Facebook and the platform to not make that data accessible anymore, or not even track that data anymore. So very concerned about this, for our clients' sake, because they're driving their business off of this stuff.
It makes that level of web advertising less effective and less lucrative from either side, the advertiser or the advertisee. Both sides lose in what they've been able to do lately.
Yep.
Well, but it also helps Facebook because they do get consent as part of using Facebook
inside of their network.
So that the value of their network goes up.
They're being required to omit so much of the filtering capability that used to be there because of this as well. So there's multiple sides, I guess, to that conversation.
But to some extent, it's part of the thing that has been driving larger organizations like Facebook to just say, we're going to forget about everything else external and we're only doing our own because we can run the rules and regulations inside of our own.
Yes. So the regulators worried about that, but I think perversely they've still got the data. They're still in effectively a monopoly position along with Google and Amazon. Right. And therefore that's going to stifle innovation because smaller players just can't compete. So I think that's a sort of systemic worry for the industry. One of the things that they're also able to do that smaller businesses are not able to do is the right to have your data deleted. Right. So, I mean, I've run this through with someone and in terms of the scenario, and I said, so what's going to happen if you want to get your IP address deleted? Well, in order to actually go through the deletion process, you have to prove you are who you say you are, So that means a passport or a driving license has got to be sent to the company, along with proof that you own the IP or that IP address related to you at a point in time.
Right.
I mean, you've got to hand over more personal information in order to actually delete this trivial piece of personal information in order to get it actually deleted. It's just, it doesn't make any sense to me.
That's a great point.
Well, so let's pass the mic around just a little bit, and we'll head to Mike to begin with. Mike Smeltzer, what's your takeaway on some of this? Crickets. No, he just posted on the chat. Just 2 seconds.
His mic just came on, but it wasn't working earlier, so.
Yeah, that happened the other day too. We'll give him a second more. All right, Will Stroll, you're up. How about you?
Unmuted. No, so like some of the stuff I've seen before, and I've had some conversations with him on several occasions in the past. First of all, man, all this consent stuff, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare to handle, it's a nightmare to wrap your head around, it's a nightmare to implement, and it's a nightmare to talk to clients about and getting them to care about it. But, you know, as far as, you know, all this stuff, the things that 51 Degrees is doing and the way they're thinking about it and approaching it, both from their perspective strategically and then also in helping others with it, it's just, it's really cool to see.
Thank you, Will, and thank you for the blog you wrote last year, I think, on connecting us to Google Analytics service client side as well. That was very helpful.
Close to 2 years at this point.
I'm sorry?
I think
2 years, was it?
Yeah, I think it's getting close to 2 years now.
I think you need to blog more.
Well, he's talking about a very specific blog.
Well,
yeah, you need to blog more.
I like to, Will, though, your point.
Ironically, I am literally writing a blog during this meeting.
Oh, sweet.
Multitasking.
About DNN.
I liked your point, Will, about clients, and it's hard enough to describe these things to clients. And with any new wrinkle in legal responsibilities, there's client education. And we've had to do it back in the beginning with email marketing and getting them used to the idea that they couldn't just spam the heck out of people. One of my favorite client quotes was from a client who was insistent that they were going to spam like crazy, and they said, "Why is it illegal? I receive spam all the time. Why can't I spam people like nuts?" So there's client education and communication that's going to happen, and to some extent in the industry, there's going to have to be a little bit of time for that education to percolate before people can stand up and say what they think is reasonable, understand the topic well enough to know what isn't reasonable. That's going to take time. That's one of the things you mentioned a little earlier, Will.
Yeah, indeed. And so one of the things we've also started to do, because I'm concerned about risk. I have insurance, but I don't want to, as I tell my clients, I don't want to figure out where it ends, right? And so for some of these things, I'll actually explicitly in our SOW say, hey, these are the things we're not going to do, so that way we have some sort of documentation. Like, no, we let you know, because you never know how, like, some of these lawsuits in the future, how they're going to set precedents to be able to, like, maybe make the agency accountable. And I don't want to be accountable if they're choosing not to do it.
If you've had just as much fun from a random, very lightly researched ADA, I don't want to say lawsuit, but ADA complaint come up and had to deal with documenting and responding to that, that alone takes weeks and weeks of time that suddenly comes out of nowhere and is immensely important the minute it happens. Same thing with patent trolls or any other thing that is the next new thing where you have to suddenly pay attention to documenting what you've done. That is a really, really good point that I hadn't thought about, Will, until you mentioned that. Well, who else we got online with us? Mike, your microphone back up again. You want to try and come back on? And I don't know if...
Can you hear me now?
Oh, we do?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hey there, buddy.
Nice. Yeah, I had a new mic the other day. I've been having computer issues lately. Tech guy always has computer issues. I guess, first off, James, great presentation. Learned a lot of cool tidbits there. I've also used the measurement API before, and it's quite powerful. Google's got a whole suite there for sending data to them, but also for pulling data out, so you can do your own custom reporting with the same type of stuff too, which is pretty cool. Some of the chat in the chat room, and as you guys were talking, it's a tough one. Users do not want to click on consent. I know people that I've seen in person, go away from web pages that pop up and they want you to click something. It's a tough gamble. And Will's points about risk there, it's a lot of this stuff, in my opinion, it's just like insurance. What is your risk threshold? And the laws are sometimes not as clear on things, and people don't know. So it's good to see this type of stuff getting more out there, and that there's potentially some alternatives on how to augment what we do today. And who knows what's going to happen tomorrow.
Well, yeah, tell me about that one.
I hadn't considered. I'd gone to and thought about IIS as a way for getting information and going for IIS logs, but I had not considered the idea of doing server-side tracking, which is part of what you used to do back in the day. And it gets you a lighter JavaScript load, and it makes fewer external elements be necessary. I could see myself being easily in favor of that once something is in place that's easy enough to drop into a site.
So let me get this straight. You're a proponent of web forms and staying on web forms with DNN. Okay, gotcha.
I will tell you that there are times when I have said I am a proponent of web forms. That is not too far of a stretch. So very, very eye-opening conversation that shows us some things that maybe I haven't considered in the same way until now, and this is very, very interesting. Well, James, I'll let you have kind of the closing word, and then we'll kind of start wrapping up our meeting here.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Ryan and David, and Clint as well. Sorry if we've been a bit clunky moving things around. I'll have to get a better system next time. But we've covered a little bit about kind of how I got involved in this through predominantly programmatic advertising and our clients there, and had to find out more about this. The fact that we've taken a decision as a business to completely follow what the regulator's doing, and we're continually looking at ways of implementing that in a really nice way. So we do have some work that we're doing around the user interface and just seeing what we can do there, because it's not that user interface that you have to produce, it's the informed consent that you have to produce. So perhaps there's a nicer way of doing it, and we look forward to sharing that. We've also got that code that I was showing you. The intention is to turn that into a proper set of NuGet packages in the not too distant future, and take what we have to do for ourselves and make that available to the community. It's, as you were just saying, this isn't a problem that's going to be finished forever. It's going to be an ongoing challenge between public perception. I don't think Cambridge Analytica did any of us any favors. And the publicity on the back of that. If you've not seen the Netflix documentary, do. It's an interesting watch. I look forward to sort of staying engaged. I'm not a big one for social media, I'm afraid. So the sort of conferences or email and stuff like that. Let me know if you've got any questions, and I'll let you know when we're ready to get some modules out there.
Well, thank you very much for this presentation and bringing us this topic. Everybody celebrate with a round of applause. Thank you very much. Just some wrap up here for the event. We of course have our Southern Fried DNN user group meetings on the third Thursday of every month. In October, that puts us here at October the 17th. as the third Thursday next month. We do have our meeting topics and guests planned out essentially for the rest of the year. In October, we have Bogdan with DNN Sharp joining us to share with us a new solution that is out from DNN Sharp and those bright minds. So we're going to have them in, and we'll continue on with a couple of other sidebar elements. I will have another installation of working on and talking about the DNN docs and my journey to understand how to do that better and in a bit more efficient way. And the goal here is to finish with a blog post that helps others get involved and do it easier. So that's October. November, we have Mike Smeltzer joining us in November. He's going to spend some time giving us a bit of a hands-on release show and details. We've seen Shine a couple of times now, and at that point we should have some release versions that we can be actually looking at and talking about, and so we're very excited about having that in November. And then in December, we take a break. Technically here internally, we do our Christmas party and get together. So that's our chance to put out the invitation and say that anybody who's in the driving or flying distance that wants to come join us and party with us, the third Thursday, roughly around, is when we end up trying to do our Christmas party in December. So if there's a possibility you're coming our way, let us know, and we'll make sure to save you a seat. Thanks again, everybody, for supporting the DNN community. Remember, we have DNN Summit coming up. Please take a look, register, see how you can get involved, and during the month ahead, make sure you check out not only the DNN community's Slack workspace so that you can help others and also ask for help, but more importantly, connect with Will Stroll and the team that he's put together, putting the excellent information going into the DNN community website, and there are always volunteer needs, content needs, and just participation needs there with that new site. So thanks very much, everyone, and we will see you next session.